So we need to start by just even breaking down. We just, the vernacular. So CDFI, that's a lot of letters, Native CDFI, and then you just added another one, venture capital. So maybe I'll pick on you two to describe what a Native CDFI, community development financial institution, that's a mouthful. How do they get started? Why are they unique? Just a little brief history so that, and there are folks who probably knows what a CDFI, and there are probably folks that don't or have some knowledge. So let's start from the basics, and then Jake, if you could also then tackle what is venture capital, which is a little bit different, but you two, you want to tag team on what is a CDFI?
So CDFI, Community Development Finance Institution, essentially it's a designation from the U.S. Treasury Department. It got created in the 90s, and essentially it's to create lending services in communities where banks, like commercial banks, weren't serving the communities. And so CDFIs were a way to mass capital and then try and deploy them. And sort of the two tenets of a CDFI are they have to have technical assistance, so consulting services, education, that gets paired with the loan. So if you offer business loans, you need to offer technical assistance to support the people who, before they borrow, while they're repaying, and then having an ongoing relationship. And then there's sort of broad CDFIs as a general sector, and then there's one sub-designation, and that's Native CDFIs, and that's for any CDFI that serves specifically Native communities. And a lot of them are more rural-based or reservation-based, and then there's a few more and more urban Native CDFIs, like Minnesota Fund.
Yeah, and so the part that, being urban versus rural, we're located on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And so when we were first started, we were designated by our tribal leadership, understanding that the need to access capital for our local entrepreneurs and especially artists was great. We didn't have traditional banks in our community that were saying, hey, come to us, we're gonna give you a loan product, we're gonna help you fill the need in your financials, we're gonna help you build your life, we're gonna help build your wealth. That was foreign to all of our community members. And so it really did start with our leadership locally to say, hey, there's this buzzword going around, right, in the late 1990s, CDFIs, how do we get one here? How do we get it into our community to help our people prosper? And so it was designated through our tribal leadership to start Forband's Community Fund with the basic need of artists needing capital. I think some of the data that was shared yesterday was that 70% of our households do some type of entrepreneurship within their to supplement their monthly income, and the arts play a big role in that, and culture bearers as well. And so that's how Forbands was started and created, was off that buzzword of, hey, how can we get this in our community to help our membership, our citizens, and what can we do to strengthen that? And so CDFIs have played a huge role in urban communities across the nation.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So we started in 2004 as a venture capital fund with the goal of getting tribal leadership here in New Mexico to invest in this fund. So our first fund was about $14 million, and we were looking for Native businesses that were investment ready. And the real reality is that they couldn't find any investment ready Native businesses, right? Non-tribally owned for entrepreneurs. So I'm sharing that because there's something fundamentally wrong with our whole finance system. Right? I'll say it, right? That it's really difficult to find a business that's ready to scale and then also be able to get a return. Because at the end of the day, sharks and shark tanks, they're all looking to make more money with the money that they already have, right? And that's the basic premise of the model. So we have this fund. We looked for Native American businesses to invest in. We found a couple. One of them, Bow and Arrow Brewery, one of our main people at the time, financial analyst, is actually now the owner of Bow and Arrow Brewery. And she decided, we should create our own technical assistance program. And what we need is not loans, not investment, but straight up cash, like cash grants. Y'all feel me on this? This is important, right? Like no questions asked, cash assistance. So we started our Native Entrepreneur in Residence program. That was $15,000, just seed fund, do whatever you want, you don't have to pay it back, plus 6-month mentorship. And that lasted for about 5 years, and that's when we became a CDFI, and we started to loan money to these businesses. There was a couple challenges that we found. A A lot of them are solo entrepreneurs, right? So the access to capital can really help when they're wanting to grow their business and scale their business. But a lot of times our artists were actually fine without accessing capital. And what we realized is that we are actually strengthening these businesses by being a fiscal sponsor, right? So a nonprofit that helps artists get other grants. And that's really what we focus on. So we have over 30 fiscal agents and sponsors with New Mexico Community Capital. We help them get grants, and we found that there is kind of an ecosystem here in New Mexico around lending. But the problem is, again, how are you going to scale, right? How are you going to pay back the money that you're going to loan? And there's some serious incidents that happened, to our entrepreneurs during this time. A relative passes away. They have a severe medical injury or expense. And so a lot of our loans that we actually lent out ended up not going through, right, to say the least. We had to forgive these loans. So I'm sharing this story because this is just our experience as a CDFI, that now what we're realizing is that A, the 5 C's of credit do not serve our people, right? Credit, capital, character, collateral, all of these things are not easily accessible to our people. So we had to take away that 5 C's. So we had to come up with new ideas like relationship-based lending. And then we also had to come up with debt forgiveness, right? Just like how you all saw during the pandemic, right? With the loans that the federal government gave out, there has to be some type of built-in loan forgiveness. So long story short, right, I'm here to just promote that, yes, CDFIs are really important to community, and access to capital is really important, but there's bigger systemic issues that are going on, that the cost of goods sold for entrepreneurs is going up, that profit margin is going down, and then, I just want you all to think about that. How are you going to pay back the loan? How are you going to make money for yourself? And so this is kind of what New Mexico Community Capital has really thought about. We doubled down on the technical assistance. We paused our lending. We said, hey, you know what? We're going to pause our lending. We're going to really focus on our technical assistance and really focus on the digital literacy aspect, right? Like, digital literacy is inherently connected to financial literacy. And there's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to leverage that digital literacy. So we are lending again. We're doing relationship-based lending, and we're working with an organization called Native Women Lead. And they're building a $10 million Native Woman Investment Fund here in New Mexico that's going to be national. But these are the types of things that we're talking about. Integrating loan forgiveness, having integrated capital. So that just means not just debt capital, but grants, right? And other ways and innovative ways to access this capital. So more to come, but I hate to be that kind of bringer of bad news, but it's tough out there. And I'm just working with entrepreneurs every day, and I'm seeing that we need to go beyond what this financial system, has to offer.
Great, thank you, Jake. So we know that banks' primary goal is to make money. So when they lend, they not only want it back, but they want some on top of that. What's the primary goal of a CDFI? Is it to make money?
Some of them. No, for us, it's entirely about impact. And so, like, for example, like the loans that we do are all locked at 4% interest, no matter what the credit worthiness is. And generally, like, a lot of our capital that we lend out is borrowed to us from foundations. So we get it around like 1% to 2% interest. So there's a little bit of money that we make that essentially we're able to re-lend generally. But yeah, really it's about impact. And so like Henry was talking about, really integrated capital, finding ways to get grants into people's hands. So, say somebody needs $20,000 in capital. If you can give them a $10,000 grant and a $10,000 loan, it gives them an opportunity to build their muscles around having a loan and really building that into their business practice, because it might come in handy as their business grows. But they have $20,000 and they only have to pay back $10,000. So it gives them an opportunity to buy more assets, but then have a lower liability to repay. So.
Yeah, the fun part about CDFI and that acronym is community, right? And that part is in the middle of it. And so at Four Bands Community Fund, we take that to heart. We really do look at building our community, listening to our community, and seeing what the impacts that they need, the gaps that we can fill, and the opportunities that we can give our members as well. And so the fun part about, the jobs and the things that we're able to do is we're able to build markets for artists to be able to come and test out their product. We're able to provide 5-week business training courses. And so that family or that individual can come and say, hey, I have this idea. Is it going to work? Is it not? How can I get help? How can I become a client into your portfolio? And so it's a lot of those things in a sense of not so much just numbers, right? You talked a lot about the numbers and businesses are failing and all this, crisis management type of situation, which it does go into, and it does happen. But at the other side of it, you got to look at the silver lining in a sense of that you're growing the capacity of your community, you're providing opportunities for Native entrepreneurs, which historically weren't there. We didn't have any major banks, and we still don't on our reservation. They're all local banks that come in and have been there, but they're not jumping from the rooftops to help members and citizens either. And so it's really building your community from the base up and saying, what do we need? Housing? Okay, let's look at what does it take to become a mortgage broker on the reservation or in an urban area? Do you need more markets to practice selling some of your stuff or just testing out your business idea? Okay, let's look at building a business incubator. We do have a business incubator that we have and it launched in 2018, right before the pandemic, and have found that people are able to take that risk, that step, and put themselves out there in the community and say, hey, I'm going to start this business. I'm going to be incubated first. I'm not going to take on huge debt to just see what my idea can hold. And if it holds weight in the community where I can grow my business, my wealth, and help my family, then we're able to do that. So the community part is really important in the CDFI acronym in a sense of that's what we're doing. We're building our communities for us, by us.
Yeah, that C in CDFIs is so important because I've heard so many stories where people had all the right documents, all the right numbers, and were still denied by non-tribal CDFIs, right? So they play such an important role in being able to grow businesses, especially in rural communities. And I'll just add a little bit more to that. I think that, what we're seeing is that these businesses, your businesses, right? I take it you all are artists and working, right? Like in order to grow, you need that resource, right? That capital is water, right? And you all those seeds. So in order to make those seeds grow, you have to have that resource. And CDFIs have this amazing ability to be creative, right? And that technical assistance to be embedded into the work. And we don't see that in banks, right? We just see that we're just here to make money and make profit. And we ran business analysis, and we really wanted to do microloans, right? So less than $50,000. And we found out that it was not a good business decision for us to do this, right? Like, we're going to lose money by doing this lending program. And that's why there's also access to grants and other resources that we're able to subsidize our work. So we're not making money on the loans per se, but we are really making that impact. And what I'm really interested in is when we start measuring this larger community impact, right? And we bring this back to funders by how many jobs were created, how our quality of life is increasing through our work that we're doing. So I think that's the future of this work. Also, incorporating the environmental, responsibility that we have, the sustainability and sustainable practices that we do in our work. All of these things are going to be valuable one day, and I think they are, in this moment right now too.
So we know that Native CDFIs often are in places where traditional banks refuse to even set up because, one, they don't make the money. And so they're in what we'd call hard-to-bank places. So what does a typical customer come in through the door, right? What do they look like? Are these people with amazing credit? What, are these all homeowner? I mean, who's coming to the door, number one? And if they're not, how are you out there convincing folks to engage with an institution that perhaps they've never, ever even engaged with in the first place? Like a young artist, maybe he's living on the res, has never had a bank account. Can they come to a CDFI? I don't know. What?
Sure. So in our community, we offer services to our community that, speak to them. Our tagline is a place to grow. And so we offer different products where individuals can come in. Something as basic, our first relationship with our client might be that we run a VITA tax site. So we offer free tax preparation for individuals on the reservation. And so that first relationship that you might have with them is them coming in to do their taxes. And then from there, everyone gets a little curious. Well, what do you do? How long you been here? What can, I have a cousin that, wants to start a business. So it really is the, oral communication of building that relationship. Number one, they're trusting you because they're handing you all their identity, right, to do their taxes. So you build that trust, and then it's like, okay, thank you for helping me. I appreciate the service. And then it grows from there. So it's a ripple effect in our community. And then they see the success. They see their cousins, their aunties, their uncles, their grandparents, their friends, growing with us. Anything from building their credit to having a business idea to being, pre-approved for a mortgage. We've tackled that process as well. Or it's them starting a business or getting a line of credit for an existing business. And so it's really the relationship building and the trust that you build in your community. It's taken us 23 years, to really be that standalone institution in our community that says, we are here to help you. We're not here helping ourselves, And so it does take time. It is relationship building. It is I can't speak on that trust enough, because in our families, if you grew up on the res just like I did, born and raised, finances weren't talked about, and you alluded to that yesterday, but we all are sitting here because our parents were the best planners, right? You didn't always get that new birthday gift or those Jordans you wanted back in 1992, but you had food on the table, you had lights in your house, and necessarily your parent was getting you up and getting on that bus to get to school. And so you had what you needed, but you didn't always have your wants. And so even something as basic as starting financial literacy classes so people can become bankable, that's a relationship that we do as well. There's not anything that's too small that we say, oh, we can't help you with that, just go down here. It's really meeting our clients where they're at and saying, hey, first step is we got to get you a bank account. Do you have the proper documentation that you need? If not, here's how you get it. And, it's just being that support and that resource in the community to say, we're here, we believe in you, you can trust us, and it builds from there into a ripple effect of all the other products that we offer.
What we see a lot of times is, so especially on the business side of our work, we really see people come to us in sort of one of two categories. Folks who maybe don't have the experience that they need yet to really thrive in operating their business. And so that's where we can, our technical assistance team sits down with them and really starts talking about how business models work, and talking about, how to identify what your market is, how to identify what your price point is. And so we start with them and just sort of go through the different elements of what a business, not a business plan where it's this 30-page document that no one will ever read, including the person who wrote it. It's more about going through just sort of imagining, how does this idea actually come into reality, and what do the different elements of it look like? And for folks like that, we try to have, both through partners and through our own money, to have some grants available so that they can test what we call minimum viable product, the MVP. So if you can come up with, this is, if you want to run a shop, how can we, with $2,000, get you at a farmer's market, for example, where you can bring the products that you're going to be trying to sell in your future store, and just get initial customer feedback, sort of see where the hitches are in your operation. Bagging things is something maybe people haven't considered, and so you start to, by testing the idea in real life with a small grant, then you put together, you start to understand how the business model works in reality. So that's one category, and we've worked with a ton of people like that who have eventually gotten to a point where they're ready for capital, and they've opened their shop, or they've launched their business, and have been able to repay their loans, and often are ready for more capital after that. Then the other category are people who have established their businesses, and maybe they're not confident in their tax preparation, they're not confident in how they're doing digital sales, so it's they're there, they have growth goals, but they're not starting from square one. And that's a similar way we can just provide consulting services where we help them identify what their specific goals are, and then get actionable steps of how they can get to that point. And so going through that process, if capital is what they need, in just doing that consulting, we've essentially made their business plan as we do that. So we try to set aside any of the legwork that is just sort of a bank requires application after application after application, and they're going to request 30 rounds of documents, maybe 5 rounds of documents. But yeah, so we try to cut all of that out and just make it relational and focused on the person's idea.
Yeah, we start with food, believe it or not, right? Because building that trust is so important. And so rather than asking, what your credit score is right now, we talk about what was money like at home when you were growing up? Because there's a lot of trauma in money. And that comes up. It comes up so big when we talk about loans and we talk about growing our business. I couldn't do my financials because I didn't believe that I could actually make money on my business. right? I had to talk about that. So we start at the dinner table. We start with giving everyone a computer, right? Computer access is still so important for our business. We see if people have a website, if people have that basic digital literacy skills to start writing business plans. And we use free tools like Google Workspace to really teach people, the templates of the business plan, of financial statements. We like to have intergenerational, learning so that we have folks that are already established to folks that are just starting out, because I think peers teach each other so much more than I think I could as a teacher. Am I right? Are you learning from each other, right? By being in cohorts, that's why it's so important. And then we give them money. And this has been the most controversial thing, I swear. Giving people money, no questions asked, especially poor people, is the hardest thing you could do, I'm telling you all. Because everyone says, why would you give people money without asking how they're going to spend it? Well, we then give them a monthly budget. And we ask them, how are you going to invest that $1,200, right? We give people a digital wallet so that they could sign up for QuickBooks right away, get set up. We get them a website via Canva, via Weebly, so they can start and have that traction. So I'm just sharing this, that we come with a lot to forward before we even start talking about loans. Because in that process, you learn a lot about people, right? How are they going to use that $1,200? Yeah, some people might have bought new Jordans with it, but other people we've seen quadruple, right, their revenue and income just with $1,200. So all of these things we just really advocate for before we talk about loans and lending, because again, there's a lot of trauma in there. You have to build that relationship. And to be honest, like we mentioned, if we could get people grants and if we could get people access to other resources and networks and more jobs, that's, I think, our goal, right? That's really how we measure success. And I'm coming from an anti-capitalist perspective, right? Why am I in lending and access to capital? Because I'm an educator first and foremost. And I just want to bring this up, this big word of Indigenous epistemology. Have you all heard this? Indigenous pedagogy. Who here is our educators, Indigenous educators out here, right? We bring in our worldview into everything that we do. So when you all come up with programs around financial literacy, take it as a ceremony, right? Literally, how did we come up with our programs? We went to the mountains and we prayed. And we tell that to our clients, because then they say the same thing. Well, guess what? Actually, I pray all the time when I'm making my jewelry. I'm in deep prayer when I'm making my paintings. And that's the way that we kind of resonate with our audience, right? We bring in spirituality. So, kind of random, but
yeah,
thought I'd share it.
Thank you. So, obviously we love to celebrate successes and when we have those clients or customers that do well. But also, yesterday I talked about risk. So, what happens when someone doesn't, default? Maybe there's folks going, man, maybe I have an idea, I want to take risk, but what happens if I can't pay back the loan? What happens to me as an individual? I'm an artist, I can't afford, to have bad credit, whatever. What happens?
For us, we have a few steps that we take. All of our borrowers from the start know that if they do run into any trouble and they think that they might not be able to make a payment, they can come to us and we'll talk about how either can we pause payments for a period of time? Is there a specific event that's occurring that's making it so that things are tight? And maybe in 3 or 4 months, things can resume. Or is it that we need to lower the payment in general? So our first step is to try and recover the grant or the loan and say, maybe even though it feels like it's going to collapse or fail, maybe there are steps we can take to keep it going. And so we start that way, and sometimes we'll refinance the grant. Let's say we start with a 3-year grant or 3-year loan of $10,000. In order to lower the payment, we can refinance it over 10 years. So instead of 3 years of payments, it can be spread to a smaller amount over a longer period of time. So we try and deploy some tactics like that to essentially save the loan.
Normally, they come to us and say, hey, this is what's happening. What can I do? What do I need to do? Can you help me think of solutions, right? And so a lot of our clients don't want to turn to, just block out and not show up. The other side of that is we've seen that artists in general and other small businesses, you guys are busy. You have a lot on your plate. And so it was getting away from that traditional coming to our office to make your loan payment, to step away from what you're working on in your business and setting up ACH payments on your schedule that fits your business and getting the payment that way. We've seen that be more successful than saying, sending you an invoice, here's your bill, come into our office, pay it, come see us. We went away from that, and we've seen that it helped not only, number one, businesses and their time management and things of that nature, but it also brought down some delinquency as well. And it was just meeting the client where they're at and saying, hey, we can offer this to you because we understand you're busy. Let's meet up in 2 months when it's your off season, or when you or hey, let's meet up for coffee in the morning. And so it's really just relationship based and also meeting your client's needs where they're at.
I love that. Yeah, we have a similar process. This is just fresh off my memory. We've had borrowers that have had a loved one pass away recently, borrowers that got in a major car accident, a borrower that was murdered, a borrower that got life-threatening cancer. Just within this past month. I'm just sharing this, right? Like, this is the reality. So we have a 50% loan loss reserve, right? So if we're loaning out $100,000, we have $50,000 of just loan forgiveness, period. Because we know that that's what it's going to take. We know that we're going to be ready for these situations. Another thing that we built in is actual contracts for the borrowers themselves. So rather than saying, hey, you're delinquent, we say, hey, can we bring you in as a contractor? We'd love to do a photo shoot with you and actually pay you for that. And guess what? That's the same amount that you actually owe on your loan. So would you like us to pay for it? And that type of flexibility is so important. I love CDFIs. I'll also share one other thing, though. The money is coming from the federal government, right? So we have a fiduciary responsibility, right, as the lender, to do all that we can to make sure that we're ensuring that they get technical assistance, but also that they get payback. So that's why we also stopped being a CDFI, because we didn't want to have that type of, red tape, if you will, right, around lending. And it's been a difficult path for us, I'm not going to lie. Like, this is really expensive to be able to do lending programs that really work for our community. But I'm just sharing this because it is possible, and we could dream up anything. And I just, again, want to shout out all the Native women that I've been working with that have taught me all these things around relationship-based lending, around the trauma of money. Because we've had people completely go ghost for 3 months, like, this person no longer exists, right? But then we message them on Facebook, and they respond, right? So those are trauma responses, and that's why we have to bring that up too, right? That, like, those things happen, when we're talking about money and lending. So I just love those creative and extra effort. It takes extra time and energy.
So we're getting to that time, and I'm going to open it up to any questions that anybody might have. But building on the creativity, the flexibility, if you have the magic CDFI wand, which means you get to do whatever you want, what is something in terms of the future that you're either exploring, would love to try in the space of creativity? I like Jake's idea of getting rid of the 5 C's and building relationship-based lending. How can we push the CDFI or the other models out there to really be accessible, to provide as much money and capital and resources to folks in the places they need it? What do we need to do next? What's up? You got the magic wand.
A starting point would be something that we've talked a lot about is, can be called a lot of things, but self-liquidating equity. So, where, especially like a pre-revenue business or like an early stage business might not have enough proven track record to where debt makes sense for them, where they can make that monthly payment. But if we could invest that same amount of money through buying some of the equity of the business, so owning a portion of it, not controlling the business, but just having an ownership share, that then as the business starts to generate profits, then we would get like a small percentage of the profits. So they can still reinvest in their business, continue growing their business, but we would get a slice of it. Essentially, that's how we would get our money back, and they would get their ownership back each time they made an additional payment.
Well, the magic wand is unlimited access to capital, right? Number one, private capital. He talked about some of the red tape with, receiving funds from the government. And so that's why it's important when you're fundraising to, look for both roles. And that's why partnership is so important. Fort Brand's Community Fund has been a long-time partner with First Peoples Fund and different organizations and different, collectives and different coalitions as well. And so the magic wand is, to me, would be taking off border lines for us to say, you're restricted to just serving this population in this area. And it would be really growing and creating a CDFI, Native CDFI movement across the country to say, I'm sorry, we can't help you because you live in Nebraska right now. Or I'm sorry, I can't help you right now because you live in New Mexico and I'm in Northern Plains, right? So that magic wand would remove those barriers, strengthen us as one, and have unlimited capital that we can make the rules and for our members, our clients, our citizens, and not have to answer to anybody else because we're making the programs that we believe in for us, by us.
Yeah, I love all those. Magic wand, we can do it. I forgot to mention, I'm absentee Shawnee, so that's the tribe of Tecumseh. So if y'all know Tecumseh, I'm living Tecumseh's dream, and he was all about uniting all the tribes and nations, right, under one kind of confederacy. So we're looking at this thing called DeFi, decentralized finance. If you all are following maybe blockchain or Web3, there are these organizations called decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. So essentially, it's decentralized finance. So imagine if everyone in the room had the opportunity to fund people, to grow their own bank account, their own digital wallet, and make decisions on how the money is going to be spent. Right? Could you imagine that? If we all had shared ownership in each other's businesses and we could all have that decentralized governance, so we could decide, hey, you know what? There's a property right next door here in Santa Fe. Should we buy it? Well, collectively, we can do that. Individually, we can't, right? And that was Tecumseh's whole adage of one arrow breaks, but multiple arrows don't. Right, so we're looking at something called the IndigiDAO. It's a decentralized autonomous organization, and we're piloting it with Native farmers. So the idea is that all our Native farmers get a universal basic income of $1,000 each month for a year, no questions asked, and they start a pot. They have governing a pot right now of $50,000. So all of them get to decide how they use that $50,000. They vote on it, they share about it, and their only goal for this group is to put on community events, to educate more community members around financial literacy, around agriculture. So it's working. And I'll tell you this, like, okay, I'm gonna say this, right? We're all Indigenous people in here, right? We're kind of rowdy, right? And we're kind of independent a little bit, right? And we're a little distrustful. So this idea of using a trustless environment, aka blockchain, to be able to build trust is actually pretty fascinating. So I think of my ancestors. If Tecumseh knew about all these new financial technologies, what would he do? And he was doing it. He was buying guns from the British. He was working with the French. He was fighting the Americans. He was making all of these alliances. So I'm just bringing back what we already had, right? A decentralized kind of governance approach. What would that look like for tribes, right? Imagine if your tribe had a decentralized approach rather than a hierarchical approach, how things would change. So we're really looking at that kind of larger systemic, shift for finance.
Great, that's awesome. So we're coming to that time. One of the things I wanted to mention is not all CDFIs or Native CDFIs right now are equal. Some are a lot more experienced, have been around a while. Maybe some of them in your area are just starting. That movement of CDFIs and other types of financial institutions, and it's growing. Even just over the last 15 years, we went from a handful to a dozen to several dozen. I would say if you have a CDFI, Native CDFI in your area, and they're not providing types of training or services for artists, let First Peoples Fund know. That's one of the things we like to do. We want to partner with them. We want to work with them so that, in fact, you have these types of services that they're talking about, particularly aimed at or focused on Native artists, because we understand that not all CDFIs may provide that right now. So let's continue to push that and advocate for that. The other is, I often think of artists also in a good way as activists. You often use the platform of art to tell a story, to push a message, and we work in our tribal communities. And some of the most frustrating things sometimes is our tribal leadership are 10 years behind. So how do we use both the art, the activism, and these types of conversation to say, are you guys thinking about this? Are we thinking about access to capital to create the creative economy in our tribal communities? And let's continue to be that sort of edge through our art and our mechanisms that way. And I often find that in tribal communities, it's the artists who are often accessing CDFIs or who are wanting to start a business, who are pushing these things. And then they get frustrated because, wait a minute, it's not available in my community. So if it's not, let us know. And there's a whole network now. and they can share information and how they do things and all of that. So it's a growing family, a growing network, so we can get it done.